I've known Andrew Orchard now for 10 years. He's been out in the field studying evidence of thylacines in northeast Tasmania for probably most of his life, more than 20 years as far as I'm aware. So he's very well experienced in sightings info and footprints, mutilated animals that have been preyed on by thylacines. He released some photos back in 2016.
Funny thing is, I set cameras up after they'd taken the cubs out from under that log, and all I got in the like the camera pointing straight at where the entrance to the lair was, from the lair away, and all I got was 2 tails going like that. That was it. That was it. And I thought, just the camera just turned around a little bit, and I'd have had them.
Andrew's photos are very genuine. I don't have any doubt in my mind whatsoever that he's photoshopped anything with any of his shots. They're straight off the trail cams. His photos are genuine. They're 100%. Have a look, see what you think. Post something in the comments, let us know. He's decided to come forward with a few more photos for us to share exclusively for you guys out there that want to see pictures of thylacines or what could be thylacines. So without further ado, I'll start going through them all and show you what he gave us to have a look at. For the very first shot, I'm going to show you. Now this has had nothing done to the coloration of it whatsoever. A lot of people are going to look at that and say, oh, that's paddy melon. A couple of things. That tail is rather fat. Doesn't really look like a paddy melon's tail. Now the other thing about this animal too is quite clearly you can see just there and there 2 ears on a very broad head. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 stripes across the rump, maybe a 5th one there in that bit of discoloration there. Short legs, the hocks are basically on the ground. I think this animal is in a reasonable amount of motion, and it's probably doing that peculiar gait that so many people describe. Now you can see the colour is that fawny brown sort of rusty colour that you see with a lot of the pelts in the collections, and it's a juvenile, I would say. This is probably, I think Andrew actually said this is the young male that was chasing the female that came through earlier in this spot. Now this is in the mountains in northeast Tassie. When did you first start getting with trail cams? What year was it roughly?
Oh, good question. Because originally we tried building our own cameras because you couldn't buy trail cameras.
Yeah, right.
They weren't on the market, so it's back before trail cameras came out.
So you're talking 1990s, early 90s type time?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because I never really got any for a long time.
Yep.
And it wasn't until I went to Western Australia, because I was going up checking my cameras, every fortnight or week. So it wasn't until I was away for 6 weeks or something and came back, and then I had them on the cameras. Because I was going checking the cameras all the time, they weren't going near them. My scent must have been still staying there.
So things just sort of started to develop from there. You first got lucky, and what was the first photo you got? Can you remember?
The first one would have been that one on the sand.
How many other cameras have you got all up?
I've got, over 50 without what I got off you.
Oh, God.
But I was only running probably 30 or so at a time in the bush.
Yep.
Because back in those days, the cameras took like 8 D cells, and I was spending like $5,000 or $6,000 a year in batteries.
How many you got out there now, roughly?
I've got 3 in one spot, and I think a dozen in another spot. So there's 15 or so out there at the moment.
Okay.
More to go back out. Because they're in the thick of the scrub, and it's hard to get them out in the open. I try and blanket an area. So if he comes through, I can try and pick him up on one of the cameras. Now, there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out about this shot that Andrew pointed out to me. And that is, number one, right here, it's a very non-wallaby print, non-paddy melon print, very dog-like in its fashion. I believe that that is the rear or the front foot of this animal right here that's going through this spot. Now, this animal is a female thylacine, according to Andrew. You can see with the rear feet that one foot is slightly up, this one, and this one is slightly further down. Again, I think this is in that awkward locomotion that everyone describes when they're moving, because obviously the animal's moving.
So the feet are just not quite hopping. They're slightly apart in motion, I suppose. One's slightly moving forward quicker than the other. You can see that. Lovely hock. It's nice and short. It's not too long like a wallaby's, and it's quite broad at the bottom, meaning it's probably got 4 toes there, not 3. The other thing I like about this being the original is, I don't know what the lighting's like, but you can see a stripe here, stripe here, stripe here, stripe here, there, and there. There is also discoloration of light striping through here as well along the flank. To me, this is 100% thylacine. We've had so many arguments about it online, but the fact that those 2 feet are not quite in motion together gives me the impression, and you can see the vertebrae in the tail too, like you can with those historical black and white shots of thylacine. And look at the tail on it, nice fat rump. You can see the similarities between the animals, and one's male, one's female. According to Andrew, this is the female, and there's that opening to the pouch there to confirm that dark patch there, and the other one's the male. So there's 2 photos.
Well, take it the first one is the smaller one, so it's the female.
Yep.
And then a week or 10 days later, the male must have picked up her scent and he's followed her.
Ah, so
in the identical spot.
And now that's the same spot as your controversial photo that everyone reckons a paddy melon as well, isn't it?
It is. And then I also got him back in the shadows where I think I showed you the other day, but we didn't take that photo. You can just see his mouth open and his jaws. And
that's right.
He's standing back in the shadows. And the funny thing is, originally, he must have stood there for a while because I had 3 or 4 photos of him standing there. And then he was gone. And I kept going back through them and I only saved the one. But he must have stood there for a little while staring at the camera. But he's back in the shadows, so it's hard to see when it's got the sun shining on the camera.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it's funny, most of your photos, all my photos have been daytime.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it adds a bit of fuel to the theory that they're crepuscular, where they're out at dawn and dusk more often. But you get them in the middle of the day too, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a few sightings at around 1 p.m. I think about a third of all sightings are in the mid-afternoon.
Yes, no, I've walked on them in the afternoons too, so they usually come out and sun themselves in the morning. Yeah, so I found them a few times laying in the sun, warming themselves.
That other photo we mentioned, the one where it's on the fire track, or the old logging track, I should say, with a bit of regrowth around it. What can you tell me about that one? That's a really interesting shot because even though people could still say it's probably just a wallaby or a paddy melon, you can see that really broad head with the broad ears.
Yeah, that's it, the wide head, the short, stocky legs.
Yep.
And the solidness of it, like it's probably nearly the size of a wombat when you look at it. Yeah, well, if you go to the museum and look at the stuffed ones, they are only very short. Yeah, they seem to have a short, stocky leg on them. I always wondered whether there were 2 species because there seem to be the ones that were shot back in the hills in the old days were a lot larger than those that were shot along the coastline. But it could be that they're just slower growing. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bob Paddle agrees that they're rather slow growing and probably live to at least 15 or 20 years. Would you agree with that?
I do, yeah. I always said I reckon between 15 18 years.
Have you had any instances where you've had a mother and young come through the same areas over several years at all, where you've got to...
I have, yes.
What can you tell me about that?
The one they reckon was a cat. Over the years, I've got a photo of the mother standing back in the trees in the shadows with 2 young pups with her.
Yep.
And then I've got that one with the jaw open. He's only half grown, and in the original photograph over in the same place on the left in the shadows was the mother. She looked like a black panther. But because they're in the shadows, they pixelate when you try and blow them up because they're older cameras, like they're only 1 or 2 megapixels. It's funny because every photo that I've taken has had more than one in it. It's always been the female in front and the male following.
The male's always following her around.
Yeah, and a lot of the time they've got their mouth open, so I don't know whether it's a scent thing or a way of cooling down or what it is.
Okay. Do you find that they come in the same areas annually, or are they coming through the same areas every few months, or...?
Yeah, I always say about every 3 months they'll come through the same area. I reckon if they stayed in the one spot too long, all the animals would become aware of them and they wouldn't get a feed, so they tend to just move.
Yeah, they're always on the move.
Always come through the same same area at the same time of year. I noticed that a lot of people where they've crossed the road, if they see them at April cross the road this year, someone else will see it in April next year in the same place. And usually where the gullies are in the creeks, I think they travel through the thick tea tree.
Okay. Good cover for them.
Yes.
So here is the third photo from that very same spot. There's the time signature from the trail camera. This is a different trail camera, I think. Not the Scout Guard. There's the animal there, but this is exactly that same spot where those other two, where that other shot is from, the disputed female thylacine. Now, the interesting thing about this is, again, you can see the short hocks on this. And it's got that nice horizontal back and a sloping tail. So, can't really see any colour. Maybe a little bit of brown in there. But there's those hocks. There's that beautiful, typical thylacine tail there. Clearly not a wallaby. Yeah, okay, it might be a cat. But, you know, I don't think that really looks like a cat to me. That's got a very long tail for a cat, and it's holding it in an awful marsupial sort of way. You can see that backbone going right across there. Right through there. There's a line just through there. Too big to be a cat. Got a tail like a thylacine. And again, you know, it's an older photo that Andrew's hung on to, but that spot's clearly a popular spot because that's where he's got a couple of shots as well before. So, interesting stuff. In regards to some of the controversy, I suppose, that surrounded a lot of the stuff you've done over the years, you did mention years ago that you actually got raided and someone stole a heap of your stuff once too, didn't you?
They did, yes. In a black dual cab, four-wheel drive, two fellas. I wasn't home at the time, but there was two, one government department and one logging department had all been to my place, seen the photos, seen where I had them kept, and then after I threatened one of the logging companies because they owed me money and I showed them some photos, well, soon after that I went to show the photos to someone else and they were gone, and I hadn't kept a backup copy of them, being as computer illiterate as I was back in those days. And
so you lost a few photos there.
When I said to my brother who only lived along the road, you haven't seen anyone pull up at my place, and he said, oh, actually there was a black four-wheel drive, two fellas got out the other day, they were gone for about 10 or 15 minutes. He said, I thought you were home. And then it drove off. And I reckon that's when they came in, because I don't lock my house. They knew where they were. They just grabbed the file with all the photos.
And away they went. Bummer. I remember when I very first met you, you showed me a photo that was unquestionably clear as a bell of what I think you said was a female walking down a track.
That's probably one of the photos that went with them.
But the Men in Black, even Bert Maher said he had a visit from the Men in Black back in the 1950s when he caught that one in a rabbit trap. I think he said they were in a black Ford Custom line.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'll get some more cameras out in the bush and I'll go and check these ones that have been there for a long time, and
you might have something else that you can put out there.
What we get.
And so here we have the final photo that I will show you for now. This is from the same spot again. Different animal. Look at the size of the tail on this thing. And that's got that very typical thylacine arse on it. Bit hard to see the stripes. It's a bit obscured by the shrubbery there, and the time of day, I guess, has given it a different sort of hue with the shadows. Maybe a little bit of stripe coming through here and here at the top of the tail here on that arch of the back. But look at the tail. It's just a monstrous great thing. If it's not a thylacine, it's a bloody leopard or a panther. It's clearly not a dog. Again, classic shape. Pretty sure you've got the back line continuing across there, and a nice curved rump and big fat tail, big fat base to the tail. Just an amazing photo. Not faked. Nothing I've ever seen from Andrew has been faked. Not photoshopped. Just a really unusual trail cam shot of a really thylacine looking animal in northeast Tasmania. That, folks, is a platypus in the wild. Swimming along the top of the water there. There he goes, he's just dived. In closing, I guess, they're still ambiguous to a degree, some of those photos, but there's a few more bits and pieces in there that weren't really obvious with some of the earlier photos that Andrew released. The photos he released weren't 100% conclusive, but they were pretty darn close. Andrew's putting a bit more time and effort into this now that he's retired, so who knows, we might collaborate one day and do a bit of work out in the field together. We will be next year anyway, when the SBS crew come over from Melbourne and we get stuck into making that documentary. So that'll probably be mid-January next year. That's something to look forward to. And yeah, we'll release a few more photos when that comes around. So in the time between now and then, we'll keep searching, keep bringing you whatever evidence comes in, keep posting sightings reports that come in. We're getting probably half a dozen new members a day at the moment. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers.